Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the City of Farmers Branch Budget Retreat. I'm going to put that in air quotes. Today is August 9th, 2022. The time is 12 p.m. We'll begin with A1. It's really our only agenda item, which will spread out over 2, possibly 3 days. Discuss and review the city's financial status, revenues, expenditures, projects, balances, financial trends, capital projects, fixed assets, and other items related to the 2022-23 fiscal year budget. For those of you that are in attendance and don't have a copy of the budget, there is one in the back of the room in the little stand and the clips there. It's the full budget, so you can follow along, see what we're seeing, not having to look it up on your computer. Before we jump in, just kind of an introduction and kickoff. This is one of the most important things that we do here on City Council is set this budget for the next fiscal year, the things that we want to accomplish, maintain, and make sure that we hold as a priority for the City of Farmers Branch. And first and foremost, I have to thank Sherelle Evans-Jones, Tammy, Pamela, Suzanne, and Mark for their work putting this together. It is a huge effort and undertaking. They do it every year. I'm looking forward to presenting y'all with another award in the beginning of 2023 for the stellar work that you do year in and year out to make sure that we have a budget that is not only easy to digest, but one that takes care of the business of the city. Additionally, to each and every single department for our staff, thank you, starting with our strategic plan back in January, February, developing our critical business outcomes and what we want to see as a city. You all took those initiatives, those priorities, everything that we as past and current council has kind of indicated we would like to see. That is the basis of this budget. So thank you for being a part of that and finding ways to add as much as possible for the things that we said we wanted to see in this upcoming year. And so, it's an exciting time. It's an exciting time for me. Last time I get to do this, so I'm going to make sure this one really counts. But before we dive into some numbers and some topics and hear from our staff, I'm going to kick it over to our interim city manager, John Land, who has a presentation as well. Name and address, please.
John Land, 13,000 William Dodson Parkway. All right. Well, as many of you know, I actually went to school to be a coach, and it is still in my blood today. And for me, August always represents the start of football season. Was our 5-star recruit Daniel Latimer. You probably feel the same way, but I get really excited around August. And I'm a huge Dallas Cowboys fan, and one thing that you can bet on at the beginning of August is Jerry Jones starts off with his State of the Team address. So I'm going to give you mine. 22 highlights. Our police department to date has responded to over 15,500 calls with an average response time of 289 seconds. Our fire department is on pace to exceed 6,000 run calls, the most in the department's history. Parks and Recreation was awarded a $2.1 million grant. Communications received 4 national awards. Innovation and Technology implemented a state-of-the-art disaster recovery solution. Fleet and Facilities was named one of the 100 best fleets in America, coming in at number 12. Human Resources boasts a top 10 of engaged workers according to Gallup. Public Works has repaired or replaced 23,000 feet of sewer pipe, 16,000 feet of water, and 800 feet of creek bank. Our planning department won the APA Gold Award for the I-35 Corridor Vision Study. Sustainability and Public Health was nominated for DCO Magazine's Leadership and Sustainability Award. Community and Neighborhood Services implemented the FBTX Connect app this year, and Economic Development negotiated a $23.5 million state-of-the-art multi-sport complex with the Dallas Stars. And not to be left out, our finance department was behind the city receiving its first ever AAA bond rating from S&P Global Ratings. It's been a heck of a year. Now it's time for the retreat. So I typically start every presentation with a birthday. Today is August 9th. It happens to be Deion Sanders' birthday. So in the spirit of continuing with the Dallas Cowboys, Deion Sanders was a All-Pro, Super Bowl champion, Hall of Fame cornerback for the Dallas Cowboys. And Deion was unbelievably diverse. And for some of you that might have forgotten that, we're going to go to the tape.
So what's it going to be, Deion? Football or baseball?
Both, boss.
Both?
Both.
Offense or defense?
Both.
Both?
Both.
Both.
Pizza Hut.
Meat lovers or stuffed crust pizza?
Both.
Both? Both.
Want it all? Now Pizza Hut offers our lovers line toppings. Meat lovers, pepperoni lovers, or supreme. Piled high in a stuffed crust pizza.
So what'll it be, Deion? 15, 20 million?
Both.
Both. You'll love the stuff we're made of.
So what does that have to do with the budget? Well, this budget was put in mind with Deion Sanders. We have both citizen relief and public safety investment. From a citizen relief standpoint, we approved a $100,000 each senior and disabled persons exemption. We have water and sewer relief that's equal to a 5-cent reduction in property taxes and significant investment in infrastructure and smart meter technology. From a public safety standpoint, this budget includes 5 additional police personnel, an additional fire administrator, 7% across-the-board increases for police and fire, justice center upgrades, 20-year TMRS. So as we enter our budget, here's what you can expect from our team. We're going to start big and go small from there. So you're going to hear our critical business outcomes, and then Sherelle's going to give you a very large overview of the entire budget. And then we're going to go by department from big to small, starting with police, fire. We'll hear from our Human Resources Director and then Parks and Rec before we adjourn for the day. We'll be back tomorrow starting with Public Works, Economic Development, and then we'll do what we call our quick hitters. All the other departments that are in the budget that don't have a significant impact, but you need to hear what they're doing and you may have questions for them. And then Council, we turn the floor over to you. There's a number of topics that you've brought up. We're going to explore those and we're going to stay as long as it takes. We have Thursday reserved as an as-needed day. And if it is as needed, we will all be here. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to our Assistant City Manager, Ben Williamson, who is going to introduce our next speaker.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Ben Williamson, Assistant City Manager. Your next speaker today is going to talk about the critical business outcomes in our strategic plan. You may have seen James around the City Manager's office. This is James Mcdonald. So he's already had a career with the Tarrant County Sheriff's Office, retired from there, and now he's pursuing his master's degree at UTA. Part of that is an internship with the City of Farmers Branch. He has been the engine behind our strategic planning efforts. He's building the strategic plan that you all will see in September, but he's also put it together, packaged it with the critical business outcomes, and is here to provide an update. And similar to you all, he has a similar role in another city. So in Crowley, he sits on the other side as a council member. So he brings a wealth of experience and perspectives to the meeting, and we're looking forward to him sharing where we're going strategically based on the direction you've given us as the council. So I'll let you pull it up, and there you go.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Mayor, Council. Appreciate y'all being here. Let me present this to you. I've gained a wealth of knowledge with the City of Farmers Branch and how things should be done. As Mr. Williamson said, I've been part of the City Council in Crowley, and I learned from that aspect to see the inner workings, what's behind it, and what's presented to me on the council. It's just mind-boggling to me. So it's been great to learn. But what we're going to discuss today is going to be the critical business outcomes, which, to describe what those are, they're short-term goals. They're 1 to 3 priority that the city has that needs to be worked. I've got 8 of them listed here. That's what y'all asked for, and we worked into. We've made the goals. The initiatives will be behind that, and each department will kind of cover those. We'll glance through these and kind of hit the highlights, and then we'll go from there with that. So in a timeline review of what that is, in January, the City Council gave direction to the city staff what you wanted as the outcomes. what the city is looking for, what the citizens deserve. In March, the directors of each of the departments met and figured out how to make that happen. What you wanted, they're going to make happen, and that'll be presented in the initiatives to you to be adopted in September. The next one here you're going to notice is a very, very busy slide. There's a lot of information on there, but we're going to break down a lot of that for you, and so you'll understand what that actually means. We'll spend a little time on this one. Everything starts as a business prospect. We work this as a business model, run the city like you would a business to make it succeed. We're going to start with our core values at the very bottom of the screen, which is our REACT, the respect, excellence, accountability, care, and trust. We build on that with our vision of what the city is, as listed there for you. Then we talk about how it engages, how we engage with it. The employees is the first thing that we have to have at the bottom of our foundation to make it grow. We want to learn, we want to teach and train our employees to serve the citizens the best to make the outcome. Then we do manage this as a business. If we don't, then we're going to have things fall the crack and not succeed in what we need to. And the top thing that we're doing is serving our citizens. They are our customers. We're going to serve them in what they need and what y'all have brought that it needs to be done. All the departments are going to have a budget narrative that's going to be in the budget book for you. I'll let them talk about what's on their pages for you, but just to kind of explain what it is, how it comes about. First thing it's going to see is who are we, what that department does, what they involve, what they do for the city and the citizens. Next one's going to be the key processes. It's going to tell you what we're looking at for them, what we measure that from. Their initiatives will be listed so you know what that encompasses. And the last thing is, how do we measure it? How do we know that we reach those goals and initiatives that were set forth? So the first one that we're going to get in the objectives is to ensure strategic planning alignment to current status of city with the mission and vision statement. The one that really comes to mind on this one is a comprehensive plan. Y'all are well aware of that. Y'all understand where the city needs to go and what the plan is to get there. That's what our first objective in our critical business outcomes are. Next one we're going to talk about is to improve access to responsible and diverse housing. We've got several examples here, but the demo and rebuild program has been ongoing, and we're going to continue that. We want to take it to make the diverse housing and affordability to bring up Farmers Branch. So to plan for, build, maintain high-quality public assets. One of the examples of that is our new Signature Park. We're going to be the only one. We're going to be the leader. We want everybody to follow what has made Farmers Branch great and what has served the citizens. Support evolution of the arts and culture in Farmers Branch. Councilman Rowan, your district is the west side there. We want to bring more art and bring up the art trails within that area too, to make it more diversified throughout the whole city. The fifth objective is strategically identify and acquire property for future goals of the city. You've seen that with the station area revitalization and master developers. We're making the center of town here, since we don't have a town square per se, we're making the station here where everybody can join and move out from there. And then execute sustainability initiatives. The solar farm, y'all have approved that. Now we're working on getting the permits with Encore and TCEQ so we can move forward with what y'all wanted and accepted with the solar farm. We're going to implement the recommendations from the I-35 corridor study. This has been a several-year project. We're still working on it. We're still moving forward. The rezone target area 2 of the corridor vision study. And then overall, improve overall and targeted community engagement. One of the things we're looking at is the Citizen Fire and Police Academies having a Spanish version also. We want to be diversified and include all of our citizens. That's going to cover the objectives. Do y'all have any questions for me?
Does anyone have any questions at this time? No. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Ms. Evans-Jones.
Thank you. Hello, Sherelle Evans-Jones, Director of Finance, and I'm here today to discuss the budget, but I thought that this presentation from Marty Shue, Managing Director with Hilltop Securities, who you might be familiar with from a previous council meeting, I thought this presentation might go a long way to frame up who we are financially, what we're dealing with from a financial perspective. You have hard copies of the material, so we may fly through the details, but I'll turn it over to Marty, and then I'll come back. We'll talk about third quarter, and then we'll spend a significant more time on the 22-23 proposed budget. Marty, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to talk about your credit rating. So we did prepare these booklets. There's a lot of information in here. I'm going to try to blow through most of it pretty quickly. You have very important things you're attending to today. So if I talk too fast, please stop me, ask questions along the way. By way of introduction, from Hilltop's team, of course, you know, we represent the city as your financial advisor. It's important to note we do have an in-house credit expert. His name is Ted Chapman, and prior to joining our firm, he actually spent 21 years with Standard & Poor's, one of the rating agencies. He's actually responsible for writing some of their criteria. So we use him. He is a very important resource and great for evaluating the metrics. To start with, this just kind of gives you the actual levels of ratings. So there are a bunch of rating categories. We focus on the ones above the investment grade line. So there are actually 10 rating categories that we focus on in the municipal world, which are of the investment grade. You can be speculative grade or non-investment grade, but we focus speculative and above. So, your investment grade and above. And within that, you have the B, AA, A, AA, and the AAA. AAA being, of course, your perfect or highest credit rating. Congratulations, the city just received the perfect AAA credit rating for Standard & Poor's. You actually have a credit rating in each of the three major credit rating agencies. Fitch has you at a AA+, which is just one notch below perfect. And then Moody's has a credit rating out there, but they haven't rated you recently. Your two most recent ones are Standard & Poor's and Fitch. Moody's last rated you in 2014, and they have you at the AA2 level. So you're right there, right in that upper echelon of ratings. You know, ratings are not a prerequisite for issuing debt, but they're really important. So really, they kind of are in the sense that they help determine your borrowing costs. So you may remember from the last presentation when we were here for your bond sale, it talked about how the credit ratings are so important because the credit ratings of the city are much like you or I, our own personal credit ratings. The higher your credit rating, the lower the interest rate is when you go to buy a car or home. Same holds true for the city. The higher your credit rating is, the lower the cost of borrowing is when you go to issue bonds. So you don't have to apply for and purchase a bond rating with each bond transaction, but it's really important if you want to ensure that you get the best interest rate. The credit ratings, they offer outlooks in connection with the actual level that they set: stable, positive, negative. Stable being the most common, of course. Here with your high credit rating, you are in the stable category. And there's a whole process that goes into assigning the rating. You have to apply for it. There's an analytical team that's assigned. They beat up staff with lots of questions. They have to provide lots of information. And there's a whole committee that they put together. So you have an actual analyst who's assigned, who is the liaison between the city and the rating committee. And it's their job to kind of pitch your story or provide what your credit rating looks like to the committee. But it's an entire committee of people that make a decision on you. And then after that, they notify you, they publish a full report, they disseminate it, and then they watch you. They don't just, it's not a one-time deal. They do have surveillance, and it depends from agency to agency, but it's usually an annual process where they're going to continue to review you. So, you know, there are a lot of different factors that go into assigning the rating. You know, you can take a rating strategy. You are very fortunate in a lot of different areas, and we're going to focus in on that a little bit more in the ongoing slides. Here in the North Texas area, we're just booming, right, with all kinds of growth. So honestly, we've had nothing but pretty much positive rating results in our area over the last couple of years. How the rating applies to interest rates. So most bonds are priced off of MMD. And there are spreads based on your credit rating levels that are tacked on to that MMD to show you. So this graph is really good about illustrating for you the differences in the spread to MMD off of the different credit rating levels. So we show you at the blue top level, you have B, the triple B category, the red is the A category, and the gray is the AA. So you're going to have less of a spread the higher the rating. You can see between the gray and the blue, that's a pretty big differential in terms of spreads. So that's basically, those spreads are what we're tacking onto your interest rate. So you can see that in direct movement in interest rates. And when we're talking about millions of dollars, that can be very costly over time. And of course, spreads vary over time based on market conditions, which is why you see this graph all over the place. It does move, and it is constantly changing. Bonds are categorized off of the underlying security pledge. What we refer to as the general obligation sector is anything that has an ad valorem property tax pledge as the underlying security pledge. This is the full faith and taxing power of the city. It is typically your highest credit rating because it's very secure. It's considered the most secure. And these are kind of the main rating factors that go into what they look at based on, you know, the credit analysis. Institutional framework, that's basically just the makeup of the state and the legislative framework. And then the rest are kind of common sense, if you will, economic, management, financial, and debt. Revenue bonds are separate. They are rated on a whole other set of categories because they are categorized by the underlying security pledge. So those have a security pledge of just the revenues of the underlying system. You guys don't actually have any revenue debt, so we're going to gloss right over that. But just for purpose of mention, there's a lot of different factors that are included in that rating analysis. We think this is pretty interesting just to see the history of the city for where you are. As was noted, you were just upgraded by Standard & Poor's to the AAA level, best you can do. But I think what's really significant about all of this is that you can notice that your last upgrade was actually in 2009. So ratings don't actually change pretty quickly, or they stay unchanged for long periods of time. It takes a long time for a movement to occur. Unless you do something that would cause a downgrade, and we'll get into that here in a second. But you've been relatively stable for a very long time. You've been in that AA category. All three of the rating agencies have had you in that AA plus category for quite some time now. Again, you're in a very upper echelon, but as you can see, it's taken you about 13 years to get to that AAA through Standard & Poor's. So no small feat, and again, that's part of why our congratulations keep coming. Each of the rating, so the next three slides, each of the rating agencies publish a full rating report each time they assign a rating. And as part of that, they give you an upside and downside for what could make your rating go up or down. So we've just included for you the summary from each report. And I will just tell you that the downside scenario, which is a lot of what we focus on, is pretty much consistent across all three of the reports. If you cut or spend down your general fund balance, your economic metrics, if those deteriorate, and the fund balance leads to budgetary pressure, or it really relates to budgetary pressure. So as you're in the budgetary process, if you guys were considering spending down your fund balance, first off, Ms. Evans-Jones would have a heart attack, and then second off, the rating agencies would be right behind her. You can bet their eyes would be raised and they would be looking at you, and they would certainly want to know what your plan was to replace those funds. Yeah, after you. And again, they don't stop looking at you. As I mentioned, they watch what's going on, and they do keep in contact with what's in the headlines as well. So be mindful of that. Okay, so again, those 3 slides just kind of give you the summary of the upside and downside in the report. So we're going to focus a little bit on the scorecard methodology here. In an effort to create better transparency, Standard & Poor's and Moody's actually release a grid or a scorecard, if you will, of how they evaluate your rating. We try to model it. We use it to help advocate for our clients to make sure they're looking at you properly. So we have our own proprietary models, but this is kind of the publicly released methodology that they have. And I'll just focus you in on one of the most interesting aspects of it that at least I find is that the debt, because a lot of times, because debt and ratings are hand in hand, a lot of times people focus on the debt, but the debt is actually a very, very small component of your rating. If you look on the Moody's side, it's 5% of the 20% assigned to debt. I mean, really just a quarter of your 20%, really half if you look at it and you talk about that in relation to your operating revenues. And the same holds true on the S&P side. It's actually a very small component of the overall weighting in the total scorecard. Now, I will caveat that the rating agencies, even though they're transparent, they like to still keep all their cards close, and they caveat that a lot of times these scorecards are only accurate 30% of the time. So they do take a lot of their own liberty with assigning those ratings, but we can get pretty close with the scorecard models at least. Just to give you some idea of where you are with some Metroplex ratings, the next few slides I think are really very interesting because we've modeled you against just state and peer medians. But here's where the rating sits with a collection of peers that we've pulled. Moody's is the most restrictive for the AAA category. They actually only have 11 cities in the state of Texas, and really that's doubled in the last probably 5 years. Prior to that, they only had about 5 or 6, and it was like that for a very long time. But again, that's in relation to our explosive growth going on here in Texas. S&P has about 36 cities in the state of Texas in the AAA category. So again, they're pretty restrictive. Comparison to state and peer medians. One of the most, or the largest factor of the rating, some of which is not within your control, is wealth and income levels. So we tend to focus on this. We focus on debt a lot, and we focus on because that's hand in hand and a lot of what people relate to the ratings. And then we focus on wealth and income levels because that's really what is a huge driver in terms of your rating. And interesting of note, on here, your per capita market value, your wealth, you are really right in line with the AAA median. And you can see you're along with your peers as well. Median family income, you are maybe a little bit low compared to your peers where this is concerned, but the rating agencies, again, are going to give you all kinds of notching factors for other elements, and one of those being your strong reserves and your budgetary flexibility. Again, don't think about going crazy with the budget. And then, again, as we focus in on debt, per capita debt ratios, this is one we love to focus on, because a common theme or that we hear from clients, or that we're often trying to address, is we have too much debt. And thankfully for you guys, if you look in comparison to your medians and your peers, you are below all of your medians. You're below the AAA medians. You're below all of your peers. So we can honestly get up here and say that you actually don't have too much debt. Growth drives your capital needs, which drives the need for financing or debt. So it's not surprising that all of these metroplex cities have actually larger debt levels or higher debt levels, because we are seeing again, once again, that explosive growth in this area and large capital needs. Again, debt as a percentage of market value, you're below the AAA medians, you're below your peer medians. Again, all positive. And that's part of where, the rating agencies are coming out and how they're assigning your ratings. Everything is a holistic process in their evaluation. Debt service expenditures, you're, again, low compared to all of your peers. And then, again, your general fund balance. Now, I'll argue this is one of the more important aspects, even more so than debt, and that gets back to that general fund balance or your reserves, as I was mentioning before. You're right in line with your medians, so you might be a little bit lower than some of these other cities, and some of these other cities are getting their rating designation because they have way higher than normal. If you look at Capita, they obviously have a massive fund balance. Well, that's part of how they've achieved their AAA. They might be an outlier on some of the other medians or statistics, but with that fund balance, they've been able to inch up into a higher category. Tax-based concentration, top 10 taxpayers is a percent of your total. You're pretty high in terms of concentration, but that's pretty common when you have large commercial base. So if you see, you'll notice you're kind of in line with Addison. This would be your top 10 taxpayers. You have more of a commercial concentration than some of your other peers who have more of a focus on their residential tax base. And then the last few slides are not intended to go through. That's just to provide you the data, so you can see there's a lot of data points and a lot of information that goes into how they actually calculate. They boil that all down to the scorecard, and they give the weightings, and then they have their committee, and then they go through everything, and they give you notching factors, and then they take everything into consideration and come up with your output. At the end of the day, we think you should be very pleased. As I've already mentioned, you're in a very top echelon of ratings. All in all, this is positive information. And we think you should just keep doing what you're doing and part of your budget process. Good luck as you go forth. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Ms. Hsu, thank you very much for your presentation, very thorough. Does anyone on council have any questions for Ms. Hsu at this time? Councilmember Roman.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I just have one question. You talked about how depleting the fund balance could have potentially negative consequences regarding our current rating. Could you go into a little bit more detail about that and talk about what, maybe if there's some kind of threshold, like don't go below this amount or don't spend above a certain percentage of what currently exists, so that we can get a little bit more clarity as we go into this budget retreat?
Sure. I mean, the fund balance is what effectively we refer to as kind of your piggy bank, right? It's your unrestricted fund balance or your money that you have available. You want to just keep a healthy level of that. I believe the city does have a fund balance policy in place, and Ms. Evans-Jones is going to make sure you adhere to that strictly. The rating agencies review that. So you have a policy in place that will trip if you fall below your certain internal level, and usually those mirror or pretty close to the rating levels. But the rating agencies are okay with expenditures out of your fund balance, never for operating purposes. That's considered a big no-no. But if you have one-time capital expenditures, something that you're investing in, those are considered reasonable spend downs for your fund balance. But if it's significant or there are significant expenditures, a lot of times what the rating agencies like to see is that you have a plan in place for the replacement of those funds. And anything according to the rating agencies is a 3-year trend. So anything you do, they typically look at for 3 years. So if you're spending down for 3 years, they'll be asking, what are you going to do to replace those funds?
Understood. Thank you.
Councilman Driscoll.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Shaw, for the presentation. And just wanted, if you could give us just a little refresher, and also for the folks that might be watching this, what was the rate we got? I think it was 4 and change on the bond that we just issued.
I'm digging deep. I'm trying to remember what the... I apologize. I have to look up the actual rate. I do not remember exactly what it was.
I think it started at 3.85 and averaged around 4.6.
And I will note that the bonds that you just sold were taxable bonds, so those are a little bit higher in terms of an interest rate than traditionally what we're referring to here in tax exempt. So tax exempt bonds price off of MMD, taxable bonds price off of the Treasury. But I apologize, I don't have the rate off the top of my head, but I can certainly look it up for you.
Well, I think it was in the 435, something like that.
It sounds
I
right.
remember we spoke right around the time when we were discussing that. Yeah. Thank you.
Michael, my notes show 4.65, but.
Close. Does anyone else have any questions on this side? Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Marty, very much for the presentation. I'm a little bit new, so I'm still learning. Appreciate your patience. So a couple of the notes I wrote down just thematically from what you've told us today is that we have a lower debt than the median. When I look at us compared to the other cities in our ratings categories, all of the other cities in this comparison rated higher than we did. If I have the ratings correct. And so, I'm kind of wondering, I know that a better rating for us helps us to achieve lower cost debt. Wouldn't be surprised if we're looking for more debt sometime soon for some project or thing that we decide is going to be good for our city. So it's important for us to keep a watch on our rating. It's been a while since Moody's last rated us. And so does it make sense for us to apply for that rating today?
Yes, actually, it could make sense. Every time we look at your bond issuance, we want to be strategic because there is a cost associated with the ratings. A lot of times, depending on the size of the bond, the amount of bonds that you're issuing will determine how many ratings you need. Anything probably above 20 million or above, we typically like to see the market. It's really driven off of what the market likes to see. The market likes to see 2 credit ratings. So we'll look strategically. There is a nice argument to be made that it might be time to get Moody's to look at you. Again, knowing that they are the most restrictive in terms of the AAA category, we'll just want to look at those metrics and look at your scorecard and see where they're going to potentially have you. But being that you now have the differential between the AAA and the AA+, I do think there's a good argument to be made for bringing in Moody's.
Okay, good. So these other cities, they all, on the debt per capita ratio, they have much higher debt than we do. And as an average consumer, and many of those that are watching today are thinking that's a good thing. But they all have better ratings than we do. So in my mind, there's a little bit of a conflict there in that if we were to improve our debt, then perhaps we're playing in a different field where the other cities are and they're getting better ratings. The other thing that stood out to me as well is COPL's fund balance. It's far higher than ours. Our policy is between 15 and 20%. We're going to end the year somewhere around 30%. We're going to end next year somewhere around 23% should things work out in a perfect world. So is that fund balance policy due for an update? Should we be keeping more money in our coffers for some reason? I'm looking for some validation there because I don't believe we should, but the report kind of says maybe we should think about that.
You're exactly right, and you're hitting the nail on the head for the conundrum at which the challenge that you have, because there is a blessing and a curse associated with those higher ratings, right? Because you may need to maintain larger fund balances, but that means that's not available to use for your capital needs. And so there's a balancing there between what you need, what you're comfortable restricting and holding, and what that's going to achieve in your credit rating. If you have a lot of capital expenditures on the horizon, you want to be managing your financing, your debt, and obviously if you're looking at financing those, well then the value of that AAA goes up, right? Because it reduces the overall interest over the life of the assets being financed. So I mean, there is a balancing act there, and certainly the challenge for you guys is to let us know where your comfort level is. I mean, the rating agencies can help be a guide because you can clearly see what they like to see and where they are, but you do know that there's a cost associated with maintaining that high fund balance as well, because then it's there and it can't be utilized. And then once it's there, you also set a precedence from their perspective, so.
Right, okay. And then the last point that I'd like to make, again, more for the benefit of everyone that's watching, is, our top 10 taxpayers. To me, it looks like the city is a bit leveraged, depending on those top 10 taxpayers at a pretty high rate. And I forget which slide that's on, but that one just sort of stood out to me as well. Yeah, so slide 25, a little bit more than 15% is tied to our top 10. Am I reading that correctly?
You are,
Okay.
that's correct.
So a little diversification there would do us some good, to not be so leveraged for those top 10.
That is correct.
More business. Okay. All right, thank you. That's all. Thank you, Mayor.
And just as it relates to Coppell's fund balance, don't know for certain, but given the amount of exposure they have, should the comptroller's office choose to change sales tax origination, that would potentially cripple their city, and I think they've been storing money away in the event that that happens. So, what they do with that after a decision is made at the state level might impact what their actual balance is in the future, but I think that was a precautionary strategy for them to say, should this go poorly for us, we need to make sure we have enough money to stabilize our city and keep everything running. So, but just a point of why it's so much higher than I think everyone else, because they have, I think, the biggest exposure in North Texas. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
David, did you have any questions? No. Okay.
Thank you.
So I hoped that that would set the table. Why my eyes bug out of my head sometimes when we talk about using fund balance and big chunks and things like that, because those things matter, and I know the types of questions that are raised when we stand before rating agencies or other evaluating organizations. I saw this presentation several years ago, and I was like, Marty, pull the numbers again and let's see what it looks like if we look at more current numbers. And it just shows steady. So I hope that that was helpful to you as we go through the deliberation. The rating agencies are watching. So I hope that was helpful to you as we go through the budget deliberation. It helped to set the table a little bit. Okay, so this is about to be the fastest ever third quarter update because I kind of want to spend more time on the budget, but I do want to start by just letting everyone know where we are from a quarterly perspective. So third quarter ended June 30th. General fund is doing well. You can kind of see among all the different revenue categories that we are performing better than expectations. Overall revenue is at 93.9 compared to where we kind of plan to be at about 85%. Property tax, you'll see that number. Obviously, at this point in the year, we plan to be at 100% because most people have paid their bills. You'll see that number trending a little bit above because certain items in past year protests might factor into the amount coming in. Sales and use tax is another number that's performing way better than budget. You might recall some council meetings back, we engaged a third-party professional to help us with collections. Maybe a business is new into the city, their business is still paying into a different jurisdiction. We're like, excuse me, let's have a talk. Let's get that money going where it's supposed to be. So we see some really positive benefits of having that relationship in place. Down on the expenditure side, remember that we kind of just plan that out to be at about 3/4 of our total. And each one of these line items has a regulator on it in that it's tied to a total and overall budget. So they're spending up to the budget, but we have something in place to make sure that it doesn't go past 100 unless we let it. Okay? Enterprise fund, I was looking back at this and I was like, what were we doing this year when we set the budget? Well, and I had to refresh myself. So remember, this year's budget, you see, this is one of those planned uses of enterprise fund balance where when we set the budget last year, we had higher transfers to transfer money into our non-bond CIP and our non-bond utility funds for certain infrastructure projects. So this was a planned usage. So when you're like, my goodness, Sherelle, what is going on with these negative numbers? That's what it's about. And the largest portion of our expenditures relates to water sewer operation. That amount is where our contracts related to TRA, to Dallas Water Utilities, so where we pay for the water, where we pay for those services to take the sewer services, though that is where those totals are captured. Hotel Motel is doing well. It's doing really well. It continues to exceed expectation. So our total annual budget is 2.1, and you see we're there. You know, so we still have more time in the tank to have some additional collections. But I'm really pleased with how this particular fund continues to grow and rebound post-pandemic and exceed expectations. Lastly, the overall look at the investment portfolio. As of June 30th, we're holding a book value of 105.7 million. Market value is below that. So you see this big old unrealized loss. We have quite a bit of the investments that are broken down into the categories as you see, but the weighted average maturity. So we have quite a bit of time that we hold those investments until we get to maturity. We don't let them go until it's time to let them go. So we generally don't realize any of this unrealized loss. How can I help you?
Does anyone have any questions at this time? Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor. Was there a copy of this presentation provided to us?
I don't believe it was. I believe the approach is to provide all of these via Granicus after the retreat.
Okay.
Okay.
Just a comment. I know we have a lot of the detail in our books behind what you just proposed or presented. It's very difficult for me to follow what you're saying with what I was presented and have studied and then watch it on the screen and make notes and have questions. So I'd like a copy of this if you don't mind.
Sure, and we're happy to provide that to you. Now, bear in mind, this information is third quarter, so it's not in this book. This is the regular update that you would usually receive on a quarterly basis.
Right.
Okay.
Understood.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? No. Thank you.
It's budget time. Okay, so we're going to take a walk through the budget. The goal is from my perspective, is to walk you through each of these large chunks of the 22-23 proposed budget and to kind of give you an overview of what's all happening with the numbers and what's changing. But before we get into the budget, I have to talk about something. I have a problem. I have a problem at home. I have a problem with two characters at home, and they are Baxter and Shelby. You see, I am the dog mom of two miniature schnauzers. Baxter up front in the picture, the camera hog, never met a camera he didn't like, and Shelby living her doggy life of leisure laying down in the back. The issue that I'm having is that it manifests itself a couple of weeks ago when we took them to the vet. They put Baxter on the scale. Anybody that's got dogs knows how this goes. They don't want to talk to them until they figure out how much they weigh. They put Baxter on the scale, and they say 16.5. And my husband and I look at each other, and our eyes bug out of our head. And they put Shelby up on the scale, and the vet tech looking at the scale, my husband and I looking at each other, all three of us say in unison, 14.5. See, we know we feed the dogs the same amount of food. So maybe I'm focusing too much on the budget at this point that I'm dealing with this vet visit, but it immediately popped into my head. I got a distribution of resources issue with this kibble that I got to figure out. And maybe I'm trying to find commonalities and common threads between what I'm looking at professionally and what I'm looking at from a home perspective, but it made me think about what we have before us to figure out from a budget perspective. We have a distribution of resource issue. And I believe that us putting our heads together over the course of this retreat and throughout the coming weeks, I believe that we can solve it. I would welcome any comments from any of you or any of the public as to how to make sure that Baxter doesn't tip into Shelby's bowl when backs are turned, but we're working right now to right size that because we know both dogs should be 15 pounds. With that frivolous information, let's push forward. What you'll see from me is information about the overall budget. But it ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that ain't so. And so what you will find is that I'm going to present the overall budget, but we're taking a Super Friends approach to make sure that we unpack the particulars of what's going on within each department. I like that quote from Mark Twain because anytime I get to say ain't multiple times in a presentation, it's just a good day. The timeline. We've talked about this timeline before in a previous council meeting. You are here, budget retreat. We have a couple of more planned meetings where we have some specific things that we'll go through. Each study session will have an item to talk about the 22-23 budget. So any tweaks, changes, updates, et cetera, that'll be an opportunity to talk about that. But there are a couple of areas where we will have some specific items that will need to appear on CM council meeting agendas that will be specific, with the ultimate goal of being pencils down by September 20th with respect to the overall budget and all of its accoutrements. This is what it looks like. I like pictures. So this is the budget in a picture format. General fund being the larger, and these are expenditures that are kind of grouped together. It's the same information from page 3 of that transmittal letter, just put in a graphical format. So this budget, it's a couple of key things with the budget. Number one, it proposes to maintain the existing tax rate of 58.9 cents, but providing targeted relief to residents through a one-time water base rate reduction. We calculate that reduction to be about 5 cents to the average property owner. Well, also factored into this budget are the exemptions that we all worked so hard and were nimble in making sure that we made time to get those approved, so that those updated exemptions will flow through, and then continued ARPA spending. So moving forward with the plan for branch connection renovations, our Signature Park, Justice Center, and then what you'll also see is a plan. We've heard a lot about it from our council members, and so we wanted to put together a plan, and we can kind of talk that through for what that would look like if we were to convert the city's retirement plan to 20 years. So those are kind of like, if you were to extra read all about it, those are kind of the high points of the budget. This is all of those funds, the same $174.7 million budget broken down among their funds. One thing that you'll see kind of a big movement here is, hey, Sherelle, what's going on with this capital project stuff? What is that about? That is the movement between last year and this year. That is that the majority of that is this Dr. Pepper multi-sport complex that's factoring in there. That is fully funded through underlying payments that would come in. And we'll talk through each one of these components. You're going to be so sick of me by the time it's done, but I'm going to do my best to unpack all the pieces. I distributed this to our council and mayor prior to the meeting. I like it. It's pretty. Suzanne worked hard on it. And it breaks down all of the different funds and kind of gives you the gist of what departments or divisions are included within there. I put copies. Oh, y'all got them. You must have liked them. I put copies in the stand there, and I welcome any member of the public to grab those, or if we need more, we're happy to make some and put those there. I think it's a good roadmap to help us work through this process. So, transfers. So, transfers are hard to explain. But basically, think of it this way. You're going to see transfers appear in a number of different places within the different expenditure categories. You might see salaries, benefits, et cetera, transfers. What is that about? That is something that we have to do in order to make each one of these funds is its own set of books. So if general fund is sending money to economic development fund to help with some of those overall purposes, this is necessary to make each one of those funds balance. So transfers can either be captured as expenditure items if it's sending money out, or it might appear on a fund as a revenue item for the money that's coming in. But basically, that's kind of a balancing mechanism to make sure that each one of these that sounds so bad, I don't want to say sets of books, but each one of these funds to make sure that those balance. I want to say a big thank you to Suzanne Pritchard, because our budget manager does an awesome job of making sure that all the transfers flow through and that everything is all in balance. And the last piece I wanted to show you, this is a screenshot from our audited financial statements, our ACFR. And this particular graphic right here will bring any CPA to their knees, trying to make sure that several dozens of lines of transfers out and several dozens lines of transfers in, all net across which ways. This has brought me to my knees a few moments going through the budget cycle. I wanted to show this to you to make you aware that each one of those transfers are reviewed and audited just like any other component of our financial statements by our audit firm, and the related disclosures are properly made as well. So that's just a little picture to kind of show you. All right, here we go. Let's get into general fund. So that's our total expenditures, but we're going to dive into general fund. The general fund expenditures are increasing by 7.1%, or a little bit shy of $7 million, $6.92 million. What you'll see is the larger movements reflect an increase in public safety expenditures. We have increases within our landfill expenditures, but those are offset by an even bigger increase in the related revenue. So landfill expenditures goes up, but landfill revenue gets even bigger. And what you'll also see is a focus on our park amenities. So in that Super Friend format, I talked about the overall the overall nearly $7 million increase on general fund, and you can kind of see the breakdowns of the respective areas of increase. So fire increased by $2.78 million, police 2.0 million. Parks and Rec, $723,000. Sustainability has increased, and that's where the landfill component is housed, and that has increased by $526,000. All other departments combined, and it's about 10 of those, make up another 4% of the increase. And you'll hear from each one of these areas to talk more about the who's and whys and how that came to be and why those expenditures matter. This is general fund expenditures, the $78.4 million broken down by department. So you can kind of get a visual that from our general fund, what is that, 43% of our overall general fund expenditures go to public safety, another 18 to parks. Public Works is 7% of the general fund, but remember there is the enterprise fund that houses, and the CIP fund that houses a great deal of expenditures related to Public Works. And you can kind of see some of the other departments in their breakdown of planned expenditures there. Let's talk revenue. General fund revenue is largely dominated by property tax and sales and use tax, as it has been in our profile for a number of years. Charges for services, which houses things like the landfill revenue or parks-related revenue is a term I'll use because there's a number of different line items that relate to parks, and those are all kind of housed in that charges for services. And you can kind of see the breakdown of the other revenue categories: franchise fees, license and permit, et cetera. This is that same information in a tabular format, if that is more helpful to be able to see what those numbers are. So what I'm about to do next is walk through the large three categories of the revenue and kind of give you a little bit of a flavor of how those numbers were developed, the key assumptions, et cetera, that are related to those numbers. So let's dig into everyone's favorite property tax revenue first. So, $41.1 million. That property tax revenue is based on a $8.066 billion certification, which is an increase of 16% over the prior year's certified values. Included in that increase is about 16%, so it's confusing, 16% increase. 16% of that increase is due to new construction. Additionally, about 25% of that certified value is residential. So the lion's share of the property tax revenue, 74.4%, is commercial. And I'll pause here and think about this other conversation I had recently. I was talking to a different CFO about their budget process and, you know, how they're working through this or what's going on with that. And they talked a little bit about their percentage. I think I maybe mentioned in passing, ours is like 75% commercial, and their head whipped around and, oh, I would kill for having that much commercial because it provides a level of stability to your property tax revenue to have those tied to commercial properties rather than residential. So it's just funny how, you know, different people want different things in their financial profile. Another component that's worth mentioning is that as of the time of certification, so July 25th, there was about $300 million, so I'm trying to keep everything in billions because it makes it easier to add up and not shift M's and B's on the same page, but about $300 million of that was still under protest. We have that happen every year, so this isn't a new phenomenon. What we do with that number is we estimate that about 70% of that will be collected. We have enough data to tell us that. And so our overall property tax revenue is based on this 8.06 plus a component of this under protest. So we have built a number based on 8.212 billion. What is worth noting is that 1 cent of property tax is about $806,000 to the city. A little bit less than 10% of that goes to debt service. So that's, previous slide is what it meant to the city. I'm going to try to cover what this means to individuals, et cetera, on this slide. So average home values are increasing quite a bit, and I have some samplings of other increases. We're about 22%. Dallas County averages is about 23%, so it's just a lot of stuff going on in the real estate market right now. One thing to note as well, I grabbed, because we tend to like to look at, the Addisons, the Capels, et cetera, and I grabbed those numbers. You should be aware that only some portion of their municipal jurisdiction is within Dallas County, so I might not be picking the whole thing up, et cetera, so that's the limitation with those numbers. But for what it's worth, we tried to get you a sampling of residential values. The highest value of residential property value is a new guide. I'm referring to properties as male. A new guide to the mix at $9.5 million. And that is one that is under development now. It is one parcel, but it'll be divided into multiple parts as it completes its development. So I will say that number is skewing my totals a little bit, but you count it, it's in there, and then the next highest is a property at $1.4 million. The lowest values, $90,000. Average, based on the average of 327, that translates to a municipal property tax amount of $1,541, which is an increase of $274 to the average property owner with a homestead. The same presentation for our over 65. This number, the $156 increase annually, that actually takes into consideration the increase of the exemption. So it would have been probably another $112 higher had you not taken those steps. So, good old Abe. So the penny I've already mentioned before is $806,000 to us. That penny to a resident, based on, I have to put all of my little asterisks and caveats, et cetera, because it means different things to different people. But to the average property value, that's about $26 annually to cut that penny, just to kind of give you a little bit of a scope. Okay, let's talk about truth in taxation and the rates. It's a lot of information here. So, SB 2 requires that we calculate a no new revenue rate. That is the rate in which, based on the existing property values, what property tax rate would be necessary in order to maintain that same amount of revenue. So that's the 50 cents. The next line up is we are allowed to increase that amount by 3.5% each year. So that is the rate, the 55 cent there, that's the rate that takes into consideration that 3.5 cent. So we're here with a proposed tax rate maintaining what we had from prior year of the 58.9 cent. And I'll mention this one up here. So, hey, Sherelle, if your rate that you have to be at is 55 cents, how are you at 58 cents? What is that about? So there's an amount of unused increment that lasts for about a 3-year period. And with that unused increment factored in, the tax rate could be as high as 67 cents. That's not what we're proposing today and in this budget, but I just wanted to lay out all of those rates. So the difference between our voter approved without the increment and where we are translates to about $2.7 million of revenue, property tax revenue. I'll show it to you another way. So I'm picking up, let me back up. So I'm picking up this no new revenue rate, and I'm showing it to you through the years. So I want you to pay attention to, we're moving up through time, start at the bottom, line gets shorter. This is an anomaly. This 2020 is an anomaly. During the, this is pandemic, they felt sorry for us. They allowed that rate to be calculated at 8%. Okay, so that's why that line is a little bit longer. But continuing the trend, you're through the pandemic, et cetera. I want you to see that. Now, what I'm trying to show you here is what each one of these shortening lines means. So the difference between 2018 and 2019, that's about a $0.015 decrease, about $1 million. The difference between 2019 and 2020 is an increase of about $4 million, et cetera. You can kind of see as you inch forward with the increase in valuation, the amount of the calculated no new revenue rate gets smaller and smaller. One thing that I'm aware of just from watching what's happening from a real estate perspective, and again, hi, I'm a CPA, I do this, not real estate, but I see these reports. I'm sorry. But I do see these reports that talk about how the real estate market is starting to settle out in terms of the explosive nature of what's happening within the DFW market in particular. The battling and bidding for homes is kind of starting to settle out a little bit. What I think will happen is by the time the increment runs out, we'll be at a point where the no new revenue rate plus 3.5 is pretty close to where we already are on a tax rate. That's a couple of years down the line, but that's just, if I had a crystal ball, I'm here to provide financial information. That's just one piece of it that I'm supposing. Last piece of information I think might be helpful to you is, and I typically get this question, this slide makes me think of my English teacher from high school, Miss Tucker. She used to say, face front and do what you got to do and don't worry about what other people do. But we worried about it. So we'll take a look at what other communities are doing, what they're proposing to do from a tax rate perspective. I actually kind of have this data sliced a little bit differently for a different discussion coming up, but this is some considerations for certain other areas based on best available information. They're doing what we're doing now, so this is all subject to change. Now, I brought in my friend, the king of pop, Michael Jackson, to explain as best we can after providing all of that information, bar charts, et cetera. The tax rate explained is too high to get over. It's too low to get under. Therefore, you're stuck in the middle. And he made me think about the tax rate, so you have him with you today. Sales and use tax. $19.6 million. And sales and use is the number, like property tax is a number I can get with. I can figure that out because I have loads of data, I have lots of charts, lots of reports, lots of things I can pull from DCAT and other places that help me get at that number. Sales tax is kind of dependent upon how people feel, how much money is being spent. Sometimes, so some of the factors that make me a little bit nervous about pinpointing that number is what's going on from a national perspective. Are we in a recession? Are we not in a recession? You know, that whole debate, discussion that's happening. And as I mentioned before, it's just highly subjective to consumer spending, which can change based on what's going on. A couple of things I like about our situation in particular this year, that third-party individual, that third-party company that we're working with from a sales tax perspective is having some positive results. So I think that kind of counterbalances a little bit of the things that make me a little bit uncomfortable. And working during our worst times, that is during that pandemic where we got the order, everybody's going home, and you didn't know when you were coming back out. Even during the worst time, we did have a decline, you know, but it didn't crater, you know. So it's one of those things where when it happened, I was like, oh, I'm not sure what's going to happen with the number. That's a positive sign for me that we have some sort of elasticity, some sort of staying power in those numbers. Doesn't mean it counterbalances all of the negatives and some of the negatives that's not listed here, but those two were good things that made me feel better. Graphical representation here of our overall sales tax revenue. And we're actually in a pretty good state in terms of where we are through this year at $17 million through June. That's a good spot to be. So we're already kind of exceeding what our current year, or bumping up right up against what our current year budget is. I got a person working things in a different way, you know, bringing an additional person to the team to kind of help that. So that's what gives comfort to say that we believe that that number. You can also kind of see the steady increase, you know, in that revenue. $19.6 million is the amount that we project for sales and use tax revenue. And then charges for services, that's the other big area of revenue within the general fund. I mentioned before that refuse services, where our landfill is, that had a $526,000 increase on the expenditure. And I told you it was a bigger increase on the revenue. There it is. So just shy of about $1.5 million worth of additional revenue. And that's from increased tonnage, increased tipping fees. Shane, super friend Shane, will be here in the future to talk about all the particulars there. And I also talked about an increase on Parks and Rec. And so you also see an increase in terms of, I refer to it as parks-related revenue. I kind of combine them all because there's several lines within your budget that list out those revenue items. So you also see some increase in revenue that kind of counterbalance some of the increases in expenditure. General fund. Got through that. Okay. I'm going to pause there because I can't tell where we are. And we're going to push forward into enterprise fund, but I want to pause there because that was a lot.
Does anyone have any questions at this time?
Sherelle, I want to thank you for that presentation of the general fund and the detail that you provided. It goes along with the conversations we've had over the year of presenting concise, understandable perspective on where the numbers lie and how they're distributed. And distribution of resources, I'll go back to your term, is very well done, and I thank you for that.
Thanks. Okay. I'm going to push forward into enterprise fund. Okay. When I think of the enterprise fund, I think of three things. I think of the water sewer fund, I think of stormwater utility because they're closely related, and I think of stormwater CIP, which technically isn't a part of the enterprise fund, but it's a pretty close first cousin, so I think of it. And in thinking of the enterprise fund, I think of three things. I think of Mark Bentley. Where are you at? He here? Not even here. I think of Mark Bentley, our Public Works Director. When I think of the enterprise fund, I think of that beautiful water tower. And I think of Rachel Johnson, our marketing consultant, who technically isn't a part of the Public Works team, but she's a pretty close first cousin in that she helped to design that beautiful layout. So let's get into the water sewer fund. I mean, it's a lot of money, but it's straightforward. We don't project any increase in our water and sewer rates. And so you'll see those amounts listed: water charges, 18.7, sewer charges, $9.8 million, and then there's some other miscellaneous charges and other types of charges that are captured there. But we don't project any 5%, 2%, whatever increase in charges there. We do have some increases in our expenditures, but we see that we can bring that in balance, with a small amount of net income, $1,400 of net income. So we see that that can be in balance. A couple of things to note. Included in this water sewer operation are about $7.4 million worth of transfers. So this is our friend. Every time we do transfers, at audit time, I start crying because I got to build that schedule. But this is $7.4 million of transfers going into the non-bond utility to continue to pay those pay-go infrastructure type charges, projects. And pay-go, let's hit on that just a little bit. That's a question that I answer when we're talking to regulators. They like to see this. They like to see that you can pay your own way without coming to talk to them about debt. So as much of these things as we can continue to do, as long as our finances allow for it, these things are helpful. I hype those things up as we're talking about our financial state. So overall, that is the transfer that is included in that $23.3 million. And then also included in this $23.3 million of expenditures are payments to TRA for sewer services and payments to Dallas Water Utility for our water service. No debt on this fund. Everybody can't say that. A lot of cities can't say that. There is no debt on that fund. We maintain it, and I'm pretty proud of that fact. I should have put that in different size font. I don't think the font reflects the amount of pride that I express in saying there is no debt on that fund. Stormwater utility. So just like on the water sewer fund, there's no rate increase that's being factored in here. But I wanted to include this slide because sometimes, like the customer service area is also a part of finance, and I hear some of the questions, what is this about, et cetera. So I wanted to include just a little bit of information to try to be explanatory about what that charge is. So, the stormwater fee is based on the amount of impervious surface area each property has. So I included two pictures here. One of a tier 2 type property. You see it's got grass and all sorts of things that act as a sponge to absorb that water, keep it from going into our runoff system, into the drainage system. And then I'm trying to include like two pictures of like extreme examples so you can get the gist of it. The commercial property that's included here has, you see tons of parking space, et cetera. And commercial properties are billed at, based on the amount of square footage or the amount of equivalent resident units. So we have 3 tiers of resident units, and when we implemented this fee back in 2015, a third-party firm, Freese & Nichols, went through each one of those properties and classified it according to I don't know how much or little grass it has, I don't know. But they went through and classified each one of the residential properties according to its square footage and how much impervious surface it has. And you can kind of see the monthly fee for each one of those. So a tier 2 would pay $550 compared to about $308 for a large commercial property. I mentioned before, there is no rate increase proposed for the stormwater fund, and I will just say that pretty much what the stormwater utility fund does is transfer its revenue to CIP. That's its story. And so you'll see large transfer here that's going into stormwater CIP for certain projects that Mark Bentley and his team conduct. Now, I think of these funds, so CIP versus regular operating. I think of this in terms of the old game show, pressure luck, the big bucks, no whammies, and stop. And I should turn around and say this to our directors, because you know how sometimes you have information or you have expenditures in the operating account and you thought it was going to carry forward. It doesn't. It's like big bucks, no whammies, and stop for operating accounts. At the end of the year, the money is gone. The little Grinch that shows up and talks smack wipes out that account, and it continues forward through this budgeting process. A CIP account is intended to span multiple years and to account for long-term capital projects, so those expenditures and their related fund balances would roll forward. So I mentioned that the funds from the stormwater utility, so now I'm talking about stormwater CIP. So I mentioned before that the funds from the stormwater utility were being transferred over to stormwater CIP. The proposed expenditure for stormwater CIP is $2,030,000. Hey, Sherelle, I thought you just said that you were transferring $1.5 million of revenue to stormwater CIP. So how do you get off with spending $2 million of expenditures? How's that work? Continuing with that lesson, there is existing fund balance within the stormwater CIP fund that enables us to transfer the amount of funding that's coming in during the current year, but also have expenditures that might exceed that. I'm going to touch on some more funds, but I want to pause there.
Sure, I just had one question. With the revenues for the water, does your budget include the reduction, the proposed reduction in rate?
It does not. So I'm showing you what it looks like pure.
Okay.
The way you see that, you got your budget book with you?
I do.
Okay.
I'm on the page.
You might not be.
I may not be.
Flip appendix.
Okay.
In the back. You there? Mm-hmm. Okay. You see water sewer fund, third column.
Yep.
And what you see is about middle of the page, you see 28.9 million revenue, and you see 28.9 million expenditure.
Yep.
That's what I just showed you. Okay. But drop down some more, you see 1.147, and it's referred to as a residential water credit. That's it.
Okay.
So we're sitting it to the side to allow for conversation, et cetera, to figure out if that's the direction that we want to take.
Okay.
Okay? Thank you for the question.
So Sherelle, to piggyback on Tracy's question, that 1.1479 is the amount that we're expecting to reduce taxpayers' water bill by as an offset to keeping our tax rate the same, correct?
Not exactly.
Okay.
The 1.147 represents a reduction of the base rate of residential water customers. So that's different than all water customers. So this represents a reduction in the base rate for residential customers.
Okay. So help me get from, there's a couple of places where I'm a little bit stuck. If I look at the revenue summary, our water service, does water service include that base rate, or is that different?
It does.
Okay, so our water service budgeted 21-22 was 16.147,700. I'm on page 21 of the book, by the way, if anyone wants to follow along. And we're showing an increase to the proposed budget for 22-23 up to 18,732,500. That's a $2.6 million increase to our water service. Now, you're saying that that does not include the reduction to our base water bill
Correct.
next year.
Correct.
If the reduction to the water bill is the equivalent of a 5-cent reduction and 1 cent equals $800,000, where am I going to see the $4 million that's going to impact our budget with?
So you're mixing apples and oranges.
Okay.
You're thinking about the property tax rate when I'm talking about I'm in a different fund. So sit $800,000 to the side, because what we're trying not to do, we're trying to provide relief without touching that. So we're over here. I'm providing relief out of enterprise fund. So.
Right, and I'm trying to find that $4 million, because you said, and it says it's equivalent to a 5-cent rate
Should we get into
reduction.
that presentation now? Or would you prefer I can walk through?
I think maybe a simple answer is if a penny equals $800,000,
right,
and our commercial customers represent 75% of that, then 200,000 of that would be relief to a residential customer. The other 600 would be to the commercial customer. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So if we did a 1 penny reduction,
So
that would be a
2 times 5
$200,000
is $1
relief
million.
to our citizens, which doesn't equate to a whole lot. So
Correct.
this is basically 5 times that to a residential customer.
Correct. We're trying to target it.
okay.
Okay.
I think I followed, but I'll catch up if I didn't.
We got time. We'll spend time. Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions before we continue to move on? Okay. All right.
Now, Capital Projects Fund. Included in your book, let me see how to, if you want to understand all of the details, you have a tab that says Capital Projects. It includes a narrative of all the different projects. It includes individual photos of and kind of the running total for each one of those expenditures related to capital projects. And it includes kind of a fund by fund, bring your reading glasses to be able to see it, details, because there's a lot of different activity within that fund, and it spans so many years, and so we use that data to make sure that we're tracking historical information. So anyway, all of that is included in your book. What I'm going to tell you about is just extremely high level, because I recognize that my super friend, Mr. Mark Bentley, is coming up later in our budget retreat time to talk about specifics. I'll tell you this about capital projects. I mentioned before that it was $43.3 million. The bulk of that is that multi-sport complex. I will also tell you that the other big areas within capital projects are our non-bond CIP, and it holds things like the ARPA projects, streets, monument signs are typically the things that are included in there that have, larger activities for the year. It's a total of $8.7 million. Our non-bond utilities, so that's I should put Mark Bentley's picture right next to it. $7.5 million, and it includes our utility replacements and improvements, I&I, inflow and infiltration, try to say that 4 times fast. Those I&I repairs are included there, and stormwater CIP, we just talked about that transfer, and then Mark will be here with a lot more details in terms of what all that entails. So I'm going to touch on other funds, because we've hit the big ones. Go into other funds. And within other funds, you have a few things. You got hotel motel, 2.78 million is our planned expenditure there. Debt service, which we'll touch on, economic development, and special revenues at 9.28 million. So hotel motel first, you can see that overall we are we're continuing to see positive trends. You heard my comments during the third quarter update, and we see great things in that number. The original number pre-pandemic was about 3.1 million, so it's the engine that could, it's coming back. We project that total hotel motel taxes at $2.7 million. And the expenditures continue to be spread among our historical preservation at 1.56 million and our promotion of tourism at 1.2 million. So you'll see some increases in both of those areas, with the larger percentage, I would say, of increase going to promotion of tourism, because that's the line item that continues to fund, it's like the little ecosystem. As we continue to promote tourism, more revenue, in theory, can come into the fund. What you see during the adopted budget for 21-22, this 68.9 use. I saw you looking, Councilmember Jackson. I was like, what is happening behind me? Don't do that. The 68.9, that represents a planned use of fund balance. And this is like one of these reasons I wanted to stop and just point this out. This is why fund balance matters. This is why having those balances and having that reserve plan, having those targets matter. Had that fund not been up high enough, we would have had to make some dramatic cuts when pandemic showed up and cut that revenue greatly. So this represents a planned use of that, and thankfully the fund has turned around and is not using that fund balance. The actual results exceed that planned budget. Debt service, so it's a couple of things here with debt service. The total expenditures of $7.5 million are broken down between our property tax supported debt and the expenditures related to that, $4.68 million, and our self-supported debt, $2.85 million. I'll point you to, under the debt service tab, the narrative that starts off there and kind of tells you a little bit about what each one of those pieces of debt relate to, it's kind of helpful because you can go, okay, that was the STARS debt, et cetera. You can kind of follow exactly which ones of those issuances was there to do what thing. I will point you to page 48 of the debt service section. That is the full summary of all of the self-supported debt. And that's where I get this total number of $4.6 million. If you follow across the page on the 22-23 line item, that's where I get that total from. This page 48 is a summary of all the other pages. If you look across page 50, 51, et cetera, you'll see self-supported property tax supported debt. It's a summary of all those other debt services, okay? And basically we add those totals up, and that's how we know how much we'll need to pay. I'm gonna ask you, if you are following along, to advance to page 61, and that starts our self-supported debt section. And it functions just like page 49. It's the summary of everything that's behind it, so you can kind of see the planned expenditures related to the other self-supported debt. Do you see what I see on page 63? Do you see what I see, or no? on page 63, it shows our last payment related to, this is the debt related to the landfill, self-supported debt. So 2022-23 will represent our last payment related to that, that particular piece of self-supported debt. I'm like, yay, it's going away. And I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of a walkthrough as to, it's a lot of pages and things like that, but each one of those represents an issuance of debt and what the plan is to pay down those portions of debt. What else did I plan to tell you? I've already mentioned before that less than 10%, 9.2% of our property tax supported revenue, the debt service, I'm not saying it right. Let's start over. Property tax supported debt is 9.2% of our overall property tax revenue. And I mentioned the scale house. I get excited when I see last portions of debt coming up, so forgive me. Economic development. So the revenue related to this particular fund includes the proposed sale of 2 particular parcels that are currently held for sale. And I wanted to draw attention to the expenditures. So development agreements are housed in there, the demo rebuild program. This small $50,000 amount here is funding that we've set aside, and we set that aside for the past several budget years. I think it started within the 21-22 year to assist neighbors with community beautification projects. So to date, over the course of those years, we've had 3 applications or 3 requests for assistance, and we've spent a total of $45,000 related to that. But it remains available to residents who would like help with certain other funding, neighborhood beautification projects, walls, other things like that. So I just wanted to make mention of that. Sometimes it's about education of what's in the numbers to make everyone aware of the types of opportunities that are available. And now we move on to special revenue funds. Everyone is special. There are like a ton of special revenue funds. So I felt like Oprah screaming, and you were special, and you were special, was an appropriate meme to throw in here. Look at all these special revenue funds. Everyone's special. So I'm going to tell you a few things about special revenue funds. The way that these funds operate is there's generally some sort of special revenue that comes in to support the expenditure. What I'm showing you are the related expenditures for those respective funds, and that in comparison to the prior budgeted year. There is some sort of, like for instance with the donation fund, there's some sort of donation that would have come in that makes the expenditure possible. Included in the grants fund, that number is pretty big. So the ARPA funding is included within there. Also included within the grants fund there's a ton of different grants that we apply for and are awarded, but they're all housed within this particular fund. You see the change here related to our photographic light system. So that's the red light cameras. You might remember some years ago, a couple of years ago, that there was some legislation that rendered that particular program obsolete. There is fund balance related to that particular photographic light system. And so what you see happening there is expenditure of fund balance that existed at the time that the red light camera program was outlawed. I was looking for a better word. Questions? Okay, wrapping them up. So, budgets take time. We have 6 weeks from today, as we're looking at each other in the eyes. We have 6 weeks. We have 6 weeks to ask questions, to learn, to deliberate. The only thing we know we have to do is be pencils down on September 20th. There are other meetings we can add, et cetera. If we have points that you want us to run down or research, we're happy to do that. We'll be back together after this budget retreat. We'll be back together for our regular council meeting on the 16th. I'm listening, once I sit down. I'm shifting into listening mode to figure out what consensus is and what we want to tweak or do, or what we like, what we don't like, et cetera. And hopefully some of those things, we can find some consensus as to what we would like to see presented, what information you need. I'm here to help. This is about, as we started with Baxter and Shelby, and their distribution of kibble resources, their inappropriate distribution of kibble resources. This is about distribution of the city's precious resources, and we'll take a Super Friends approach for the remainder of the retreat to make sure that we're addressing your questions and explaining any of the key details. And with that, I think that's it.
He just walked back in, so you can tell Sherelle thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is fire. Or
We've
police.
got police and fire. Council, how are y'all feeling? Do we need a quick bio break before we get into the next ones? We're going to take, let's take
15. Yeah, we'll start
minutes.
at 2 o'clock. All right, we'll recess. It's 1:45.